everyone, and welcome to another Camera Jabber video. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be speaking with Charlie Waite, who is a very famous landscape photographer. Hi Charlie, how are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you, Angela. I'm in good shape.
Great, you're looking very well.
Well, you know, it's surface. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good, optimistic and upbeat.
Good. Now, I understand that you've been using the lockdown to reconnect with nature, but also reconnect with your photography to a certain extent.
I have. I'm looking back on books that I've done in the 80s, and it's quite an intriguing process, really, because you evaluate yourself when the book comes out, and it's all very exciting, and then 5 or 10 years pass by, and then you start thinking. You reassess the images that you made, and you find not errors as such, but a degree of sort of slackness, which I think is important. And so, one should never beat one's breast about one's photography. I think it remains for other people to give you accolade and compliments and so on. But I think oneself, you just tread very gently and hope people are going to like what you've done and that it'll move them in some way. And it was a very good exercise. I've enjoyed doing that.
Have you now drawn up a list of places that you want to revisit then after the lockdown to go and get, to have another crack at that scene?
There are one or two places. I'd like to rediscover my own country a little bit, which I knew pretty well. And I think now it's time to go back. I mean, for example, I wouldn't mind going back to Wales a little bit and perhaps Yorkshire and elsewhere where I just could only be really for a matter of a week or 10 days at the most. So I'd like to rediscover some of our wonderful, wonderful landscapes in the United Kingdom. And we might have a little chat about Landscape Photographer of the Year if we get a chance. But so England, I think, and Britain in general, obviously, is full of secrets, and they can just be down the road. They don't have to be the grand, great big operatic images. They just can be quite subtle and delicate, and we know that, I think. So looking forward to that when we're done with this other thing.
I think that is something we're all discovering at the moment, that there are a lot of photographic opportunities within a stone's throw of your house. But of course there are some really iconic scenes that everybody likes to visit.
It's really true. And a lot of people say it's a bit cliched, or another picture of but it isn't for that individual. Imagine the first person on their own, they discover, perhaps on their own or with friends, they discover Durdledore and they've never seen it before. Now, people who live on it on the back doorstep of Durdledore might say, oh, it's Durdledore again, but not for that person. So I don't like the word cliche because it's not fair. Each individual has their own particular form of discovery. And, it's really revealing and joyful and hugely, hugely rewarding when they discover it for themselves, regardless of how many millions of other people have seen it, not for that individual. So, somebody comes from wherever, Hamburg, let's say, where I'm happen to be going at some point, and they've never come to Durdledore. It's a really lovely thing for them to relish the beauty of our country. So yes, that's one of many great places.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think even if you're holding a postcard of the place that you're visiting, it's really interesting to walk around and try and work out where the photographer was stood. And then you sort of think through, oh, yes, they've done that because then this lines up. And then it might inspire you to stand somewhere else, or it might just inspire you to stand exactly where they were and try and replicate and learn from that photograph.
I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't agree more. And a number of people are rather ready to say that that's a cheat and you shouldn't do that. But I remember when I first did books on Tuscany, I thought, well, where on earth do I begin? So I went to a postcard shop. And actually, I had a very, very interesting experience there. I was after I got to know the area really quite well. Some years later, I had a cup of coffee. I was outside the postcard shop, and I'd already identified the images that I'd like that had been made into postcards. In fact, there was one particular one by a British photographer, as it happened. And I thought, that's an absolute beauty. And so then I decided to watch people. I had a 2-hour wait, which was unusual. And I watched people come up to the postcards, take them out of the slot. You know how it is. And often you're there too, and you've taken one out and you're about to put yours back, aren't you? And they've moved the damn thing and it rotates. That's a little an aside. But anyway, and I noticed that when they came to the one that I particularly liked, and thought it was really special. It was San Gimignano. That was the place I was at. Lots of towers and very, you know, an iconic place in Tuscany. Guess which image they picked up? And then they consulted with their friend, and you didn't quite know what they were talking about, but in they went to the shop, and they bought it, and they bought it, and they bought it. And time after time, over 2 hours, people coming into San Gimignano stopped at this little postcard spinner, and it was quite a big one with 60 or 80 cards maybe, and took that one out. And also the people who were leaving San Gimignano stopped and took that one. By far, I wouldn't mind betting 80% took it. It was just such a wonderful image. And then every so often, the woman who owned the postcard shop started coming out of the postcard shop, her shop, and replenishing that slot because so many of them had been taken. So there is no question that a really powerful image that evokes not just, you know, that isn't just a record. This is not what landscape photographers are into, a record of what it looked like, but what it felt like. And if the image can convey what it felt like and awaken something in the human's emotional network, which is so widespread, and you know, many of us don't really understand it, but if it can trigger some emotional response, then all to the good. And in conclusion, that image did that for many, many, many people. That's the postcard they chose. So I'm all for postcards, and I'm all for, you know, looking at seeing what other people have done. And it's a lovely part of the photographic exchange that we must all be part of. And it's a really joyful place to be, the photographic fraternity, as I know you love being in it too.
I certainly do, yes. Now, speaking of photographic exchange, would it be a good time to have a look at some of your images that you've gathered together for us?
Yes, I've brought just about 6 or 7. Each one I can talk about if you're happy to do that.
That'd be lovely, thank you.
But over and above that, we had a little chat prior to this meeting, and I mentioned that during the lockdown period, something has happened to me, if I can put it like that. Well, the thing that's happened to me is a sort of super intensive understanding, or rather wish to understand greater, the world of insects. And I've always been fascinated by macro photographers who see huge landscapes in the smallest macro image. You know, I remember meeting somebody some time ago who was, I remember, you always know a macro photographer because they've got dirty knees. They've got muddy knees. And he was photographing something not really more than probably a 50p piece, if that. And he had retort stands and reflectors and mirrors and white paper. It was just a huge production. And he saw absolute beauty in the, I think it's called the fluting, is it, underneath a little mushroom. I'll never forget that. And I thought that the big landscapes, or even the medium-sized landscape, whatever we do, the outside images, we call them landscapes, but they can be quite small. We're preoccupied with them, but macro photographers and entomologists who look at things through microscopes are finding their world, huge world, full of meaning in a dragonfly or a mayfly, or whatever it's called, or a centipede, or an earwig I was looking at. So I've just got 5 or 6 images. I live on a river, so I'm very, very fortunate. So usually there's about 100 ducks who I feed every day, and geese, and I've seen 3 egrets pretty much daily. I've seen a kingfisher, and probably 2 herons, and my issue has been I need a wildlife photographer to say, Charlie, you might know pretty much vaguely what you're doing with landscapes, but let me tell you about wildlife photography. So I'm going to spend some time with some of my friends who are in wildlife, because I have immense admiration for them. I think they're a terrific bunch of people and produce wonderful, wonderful images. So my little insects, I've got a few to show you.
Excellent, thank you.
Well, thank you, Angela, for inviting me to show some of my images. There's always something to say about each one, really. And I think it would be nice to start with this one, because it was in Jordan, not so long ago, where I'm going to be going again in December. And I looked at this little tree, and I immediately established there were issues that I had to overcome. And I've got a little foible that I have to reveal that perhaps I should be in treatment about, which is verticals should not bisect. Don't really like rules at all, but should not bisect horizontals. Now, if you look at the top of this tree, it's just touching the, I don't know whether I can use my, oh, I can. Is that visible?
Yes, it is.
Oh, excellent. Oh, this is fun. Just touching, nicking that horizontal line, which is very apparent and clear. But if I hadn't stood on my tippy toes, the top of that tree would have been here. So I think in the name of coherence and something that's going to be articulate and clear, it's often quite good, I think, to subdivide the photograph that you're planning to make into sort of segments and find and ensure that each segment plays a significant role in when having to relate to the other segment. I always think quite a good way of putting it is interior design, because no interior designer, who I have a lot of admiration for, another great creative endeavor, no interior designer would just bung the chairs here and there and a sofa and just say, well, it doesn't really matter. Oh, that lamp is just coming out of the back of that settee. Doesn't matter about that. Just chuck it all in. And of course, then people come and visit and just say, what a mess their house was. As opposed to people who, you know, plan it and maybe have some flowers and just have a structure. And most people, I think, do. And it's rather like that with landscape photography. So what I particularly like about this is this kind of almost molten, what looked like molten lava in the background, very sort of orangey color, rather strange and unfamiliar. And this kind of hallowed tree, you know, as if it's a little tiny tree saying, I'm terribly important. And I rather like the fact that it's lit by some reflected light by the stones underneath. And it just seems to work really quite well. And also there's no other green in the whole image. So the relationships seem to work quite well. It's set against a sort of bluish rock. And I really did enjoy this whole process. And even the tops of the top bits of the tree, the little bits here, seem to match these ones up here. Although I often like unraveling a photograph, and I love unraveling historic iconic images of Ansel Adams or Cartier-Bresson, and I think we could all do that, where we just say, well, I love that, but hold on a minute, I'm going to take this apart, I'm going to unwrap it, and I'm going to find out why I like this photograph so much. And the moment you do that, you can start learning about structure and where the relationships are, of which there are usually many. And when you look at good photography, it doesn't have to be necessarily landscape. You'll see that there's relationships are very strong, and stories are very strong, and it's not an untidy image full of all sorts of bits and pieces that you can't really get, and you can't really receive. So that's one I like to talk about. Shall we move on?
Yes. Okay.
Well, the next one. I'm fond of, because I've often think that I have a background that maybe not everybody knows, but it's in the theatre. I could almost say in the theatre. And one of the things that I like about that background, which didn't last for very long, but I did gain a few things. It left me. I didn't really leave it. I think it left me quite rightly. No, it was an interesting career, but I enjoyed it for about 10 or 11 years. But what I came away with from working in the theatre was theatrical lighting. Now, one of the fascinating things to me is that people in the theatre don't, well, technicians, that's a terrible word to use, technician, but lighting directors do not get the kind of acclaim that the actors, the set designers, the directors, the costume designers get. They're really right down at the bottom on the program. And in fact, I think I learned a lot by very skillful lighting directors who could produce, create a sense of gravitas in the play by excellent lighting. So I've come away from the theatre with a degree of understanding of lighting. And I think we all know that lighting is very capricious. Sometimes you don't quite know what it's going to do. And there's a degree of serendipity, but that's all goes into the mix of landscape photography. And it's wonderful. Really not knowing what's going to happen, yet hoping what might, is a really wonderful thing. And this was a great moment, which there was hardly any light at all. And then suddenly there was a stab of light onto this tree, and it became stately and noble. And it was saying, look what I can look like, you know, and it suddenly looked grand and terribly important. And then I realized that I didn't have my ladder with me. So luckily the light lasted probably about, I suppose, a couple of minutes, if that. And I rushed to get my ladder. And as a result, now that I can do this, the top of this tree here was up here. So it broke this nice diagonal line. And that was, we were talking about it in the earlier photograph, disrupting, and it stopped the continuity of this line coming all the way down from to the right. So that mattered a lot. I'll just move that to there. And then the other thing that appealed to me was that the diagonal line here at the top of the tree pretty well ran parallel with this one. And when you do this unraveling business, you start realizing why an image is coherent and easy to, not easy to, wrong word to use, but enjoyable to pick away at and find out why it worked. So and then of course the other final thing, and then we can move on, is the depth is the one thing that you have to try and introduce with landscape photography, because, you know, photography is two-dimensional. So to mitigate that, you need to try and encourage the eye to go to bounce from there to there to there, right to the back, all in a heartbeat. You know, the appreciation of a photograph is done incredibly quickly. I have a neurosurgeon friend, a rather distinguished man called Henry Marsh, who, of course, we all have neurosurgeon friends, but I have an immense admiration for him. And he had just brushed that away because he's very modest. And I asked him, how long does it take, do you think, Henry, to appreciate, or rather make a favorable or an unfavorable response to a photograph? And he paused for a moment and he said, mine probably no more than a second. I thought that was quite fascinating. And then he went on to explain the eye and the brain are an amazing double act, and you globally see something and you just immediately say, oh, I love that. Oh, I love that. You know, it's perhaps a bit like that when you're looking, I don't know, when you're looking for clothes or a particular piece of furniture. You don't kind of think, well, I half like it and half don't. And I think that's a fair point.
The fact it's just like a shaft of light so that the background is in shadow or shade.
Yes.
Or under cloud, we should say,
yes,
really helps with that sense of depth, doesn't it? Because it kind of, you know, the tree is very much illuminated behind.
It really does. Yes,
I'm glad. Dense background. But I was just wondering about your process on this day. You know, you said you had 2 minutes of nice light. Were you out sort of in this area thinking, I mean, I've been in Cumbria. I recognize the weather, put it that way, and it can change in a second. You don't know whether you're going to get soaking wet or sunshine like this, and how long it will last. But were you in the area kind of looking to photograph the general vicinity and looking for opportunities, or had you seen this tree before and were getting ready to think something might happen?
I knew the tree. I did know the tree, but I'd never seen it look like this. I was with a light group. We're a small group of about 6 people, I think. And I think it's fair to say that the real reason for what I call happy anticipation was the forecast that day was that wonderful changeable, which essentially means the weather forecaster has absolutely no idea what's going to happen. So, and that's a wonderful, wonderful time to go out. I often think it's good to go out on the cusp of bad weather going and good weather arriving, or the other way around. So yes, this lighting scenario, Angela, was really a great gift. But what was especially good was often the clouds that aren't in your photograph are more useful than the ones that are, because thankfully there was another little cloud that just delivered me a nice shadow in the foreground, which was which acted rather like the front of a stage. Sorry to use this analogy of theatre all the time, but the stage, that was uninteresting. It was rather dull. It was just repetitive. You know, that's an eighth of the photograph made up of exactly the same thing. So it wasn't particularly interesting. So it needed to be subdued. And a friendly, compliant cloud, thank you very much, clouds, always was grateful for that little cloud, delivered me the shadow, and that helped present the tree in a very powerful way.
It does add to that sense of a fleeting bit of sunlight as well, doesn't it?
It does. Yes, it does. And that makes me very, very happy. And I think trees it's very, because we see them in forests, we see lots of them, and they're often, you know, mingled together. We perhaps don't appreciate that, you know, some of them are very, very old and very distinguished. And now we learn they can talk to each other. Isn't that a marvelous notion? And why on earth shouldn't they? Why on earth shouldn't they? There's so much more to life than meets the eye. So I think this is a lovely being. That's what I call it. A marvelous being.
Seen a lot of things happening, I should think.
I bet. I bet it says not another photographer. Shall I go on to another one?
Yes, please. Thank you.
This is a bit of a departure for me. That I've never done anything like this before, but I really did enjoy it very much. It's near Bruges, near a place called Damme, D-A-M-M-E, in Belgium. And there are lots of windmills all over the place. And for some reason, I thought I'd try and incorporate a reflection, which was very much out of my comfort zone. I'd never done anything like this, so it was semi-experimental. But often with landscape photography, you're waiting for what I call the final signal. And a lot of it is prepping. Is this way, that way, up, down, left, right? No, there's a, can't quite, oh no, that's not, oh no, that, no, walk away. Or, no, it's here, it's here, it's here, it's here somewhere. You know, where is it? Reveal yourself. And I suddenly, semi-accidentally, saw the reeds reflected in the water, upside down, of course. And I thought, that's diabolical. It's a mess, but it needs something. It needs something to animate it. And then I don't know what could that be? And enter cyclist, stage left. Cyclist comes along, black figure, and perfectly relates to the black top of the windmill and the windows in the windmill. So it powered it up in some way. And it was just one frame, one exposure. And I was so pleased with it. And it's still a kind of slightly untangled, almost a bit messy, but somehow this is rather like a melody in a piece of music can work. We use the word work very well, again, with interior design, a good meal, it doesn't matter what it is. We often say, yeah, that works. A poem, a good letter, a sentence, doesn't matter what it is. Yeah, that works really well. What we really mean is it's cohesive and it says what we want it to say. So and coherent. And I looked at this and I thought, yep, it works really well, but I never thought it would.
I like the combination of scales in it, because obviously the cyclist is giving the windmill scale, but then you've got the huge reeds at the top.
Yes. Yes, that's a very, very good point, Angela. No, I agree. And you could think they're a bit disruptive, but somehow it works. They're coming in from the sky. You know, what on earth is all that about? But it remains a bit of a favorite, really. Perhaps because of my insecurity about it, which in a funny way still prevails. And yet I go from, yes, I think I'm really pleased with this, to, well, I wonder what it thinks, what other people think about it. You know, very strange.
I think that the reeds also help you make sense of the image, because often with reflection images, they can be kind of slightly smudgy versions of the landscape, and you don't really know what you're looking at. But by having the reeds upside down, you know they don't grow that way. So it helps you kind of piece it together, I think.
Yes, no, nicely put. I agree with you. That's a very nice way of putting it. Why didn't I say that? It was much simpler. Much simpler. But yes, yes, that's a very, very good point. Well, moving on, if that's all right with you.
Of course.
I'd quite like to chat about this one. I love wild places, of course I do. I mean, who doesn't like the Highlands and all parts of Scotland and Wales, and Lake District, and millions of people go to the Lake District. And why? They go because they love beauty, the love of beauty, wild beauty, untainted by man. And guess what they have with them? A camera. Every single one of them has a camera. And billions of images of the Lake District must go back to people's respective homes. But at the same time, I rather like what arable farmers do in the landscape. And I love to think that perhaps the farmer or collective farmers might have, having ploughed and having sown or whatever it was, they may have passed this spot and looked back and said, "Ah, it's nice patterns." And I found it at the optimum time after a very heavy rainstorm. And after heavy rain, there's something miraculous that happens. There's not a single molecule of dust in the air, not for maybe 5 or 10 minutes before motor cars passing by and it all gets clogged up again. But that clarity of light is completely thrilling, Angela, I have to tell you. And the storm was just passing by and the rain had passed, and suddenly the light zapped this marvelous coordination of diagonals and triangles and parallels, and there's a sort of gully here, which I'll just show, that I really liked. I think there was a little bit of water. You can certainly see here there was a bit more water, a bit of dampness. And this shadow played a pivotal role because it matched this opposing side. And then all of these different colors was just fabulous. And a last little bit of light just on the top meant that the eye didn't only reside in the foreground here. And it's quite interesting when you show, I mean, it might be worth talking really to Camera Jabber viewers and just ask your viewers to play this little game, which is when you show your loved one or a friend or whatever it is, a photograph that you particularly feel you like, watch their eyes, look at their reaction, and see where they look, and then see how long it takes for them to say, the killer line is, yeah, it's really interesting. That's not the word one seeks. What one hopes for is that they will get some of what you got when you were there making that image. And if they gasp and just say, you know, that's the most wonderful, wonderful thing. I showed my sister once a photograph that I was really pleased with, and she just went, and I thought, oh, you were there with me. You were there with me. You got what I got. And that's what a landscape can convey. And I hope, you know, people may feel this. It's quite mathematical. There's no question about that. But I'd love to know what you think. Well, I hope it's complimentary. Otherwise, I'll burst into tears.
I was just going to say the next thing you want them to say is, "Can I buy a print?"
Yes, that's not for me to say, but that's very, very kind of you to say that. In fact, maybe we'll have an opportunity to talk about an exhibition that opened on lockdown day at the Bosom Gallery just south of Chichester.
Sure.
Which, if we get a chance.
Of course.
But thank you. Yes, buying a print. Well, now, interestingly, the next one, if I may proceed, we're not very many more, is worth, I think, talking about, because for the first part of my landscape photography career, it was all wild places. You know, I did a book with an incredibly distinguished writer I haven't been in touch with for a long time, called Adam Nicholson, whose background is Sissinghurst, and his father Nigel Nicholson, and a great man. Have a much admiration for him. He's done some wonderful books. And he and I did a book called the National Trust Book of Long Walks. He walked and I drove. Well, there was a reason. I had the camera equipment, you understand.
Of course.
And I might have had a dodgy ankle and all sorts of other excuses like that. But anyway, he very sweetly recommended places that he was going to write about, and I illustrated basically his book. That was my first book I ever did in the 82, I think. But here suddenly, I'm working in Andalusia in southern Spain, and I've known Gibraltar quite well, and I've never managed to make a success of this extraordinary rock. I knew I needed to find jagged. I knew that the rock was jagged, and so I needed to find more jagged. And I just couldn't find anything as a foreground. And we know foregrounds are important. You know, in old money, it used to be, got to find foreground interest, you know. And lots of us think about the foreground as an introduction to the remainder of the photograph, and it plays an important role. The theatre designer wouldn't neglect the front of what's going on in the front of the stage, using a theatrical analogy again. So in conclusion, I've been, I think, 7 or 8 times, and I thought, oh, I've never been along this track behind the airport. So I strolled along, and I finally found a little corner and a bit of a pathway, and I came down this pathway, and I turned around and I found my jagged. I found my jagged in the form of a diabolical orange-yellow wall. I mean, you know, it was a terrible wall, and yet suddenly it seemed to fit so well with the jagged nature of Gibraltar, and cut out the airport and cut out all the other bits. And then, of course, a man appears, and I find myself saying, no, you know, you do inwardly, you protest about, go back, hide away. And then I thought, no, actually, welcome. welcome to my photograph. And of course, he suddenly was the right thing as opposed to a second ago being the wrong thing. And he had a bag that had a sort of yellowy look to it, and the sea was good. And so I really do enjoy this. And I've just recently done a book called Behind the Photograph, where I natter on and on and on about construction of a photograph and how pleasant it is exploring that element of landscape photography. And this is on the front cover.
Oh, really? So it's like a lightning bolt coming out of the rock, isn't it?
Oh, I love that. You're coming up. Damn, I'm just going to write that down and claim it as my own.
Actually, maybe it's going into the rock, I think, 'cause it's zooming.
Oh no, I love it. That's a really nice, and the foreground, that rather strange metal surface is good. And then the other thing is, I care a lot about things departing, where they depart. And if you just follow this all the way down, it departs out of the corner. And it seems to be quite a satisfactory departure, because if it had slammed into the side of the frame here, or anywhere, I think when you've had a rhythmical shape like a river, or who knows what, river, maybe a road, it's quite a good idea to find a departure point for it. So it eases out of the corner. It's done its big show like it has, and then it says, right, well, I'm off. And it's best to just say, well, off you go out of the corner, as opposed to a rather aggressive departure out of the side of the frame. Yes,
the fact it goes to the very, very corner, just kind of, it seems more considered. It's more constructed composition, isn't it, than just it happens to wander out.
Yeah, I like to think so. I do. I mean, I think one of the things about photography that plagues me a lot is, and now that we've got, we have Photoshop and we have lots of image manipulation software, which is fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. But I've got this little phrase that, rightly or wrongly, other people may not agree with. Try not to cross the line. And it's when something looks over-engineered or forced, I think the viewer might feel a bit unsettled. So I've often thought that that's why it's interesting to see how a viewer responds to a photograph, especially when you have an exhibition. Have a look at how long they stand in front of a photograph, what they might be saying, and what their reactions are. I remember having some exhibitions at the National Theatre in London, which is a real privilege to be asked to do that. I can't tell you how marvellous that was by a wonderful man called John Langley, who ought to be really knighted for what he did for having exhibitions of photography in the Littleton Gallery. Many, many hundreds he did over 25 years. John Langley, top man. I had the last one called Silent Exchange, and I had some new photographs that I was keen to know, obviously, how people respond, favorably or not. And one or two people just walked straight past. And I kind of wanted to run up to them and say, what was wrong with that? What have I done wrong? It was really quite funny. Anyway, luckily in the main, they were complimentary. And it's all very well what people say, but it is nice when somebody says they like an image. Apparently people are getting therapy in California for not getting enough likes. But I didn't know that was true. But so, I really do enjoy this one, and I think one of the things that pleases me most is the fact that I was blessed with a no light on Gibraltar. I think if there had been a flickering of light, it looks quite flat, which is absolutely fine by me. Then a lot of light on this on this extraordinary yellow wall. Shall I move on, or would
yes, please? That'd be great. Thank you.
Got a couple more, and then we're into something else. I won't be so long. One of the images, I'm sorry it's not bigger, I don't know how to make it so, in the Bosom Gallery is Yosemite. As one person I know calls it Yosemite, which is quite perverse. Anyway, I spent a lot of time. There are people who know Yosemite a ton better than I will ever know. And I have much admiration for their deep knowledge of this amazing landscape. But this is called Olmsted Point, and it took me a long time to try and figure out what to do. And I spent a lot of time wandering around and feeling a bit unsettled. And then that word, the final signal, those two words, when you get the final signal, it's a lovely moment where you have an inner, and everybody will know this, it's not just me, we all know where you just think, yep, that works. We discussed it a little while ago. And I looked at this and I thought, yep, that jagged line, diagonal, and then the little sapling tree, about the same shape as the big stone. And luckily the shadow on the stone was not too dense because it was receiving a lot of reflected light from here, there.
Yeah.
And there was a separation between the two here. And the shape of the rock was not too dissimilar to the little tree. So I rather like that one. And black and white is something I care a lot about as much as color. I'm not very good with people who say black and white's more artistic than color. I find that an extraordinary argument. And when you ask them to qualify why that should be, it's quite interesting seeing how they actually don't really manage to do so. One person I met said, oh, black and white's much more arty, isn't it? And I just thought that's absolute nonsense. They're different ways of doing things, and they're both valid, they both can be qualified, and they both mean a lot to the creator.
Was this a digital image or was it shot on film?
No, it was digital. Yes, it was.
So
still use quite
you could have shot it. You could have shot it either way then.
Yes, I could. And I'm glad you raised that question, because I think in the old days, dare I suggest, in the days of film, if you were going to do black and white, guess what we did? We put a black and white film in the camera, and that was it. We committed then. So we started from the outset with our black and white head on. So then we knew about filtration with the lovely Lee filters that I had even those days. And when you said, right, I'm going to do this in black and white, therefore my blue sky will do this, and my yellows will do this, and what do I want, a red, orange or yellow filter? Or green or whatever it is. So yes, you're quite right. And if you're going to do color, guess what we did? We put a color roll in. Now, I feel we should say to ourselves before deciding whether to do it in color, and then, well, it doesn't really work in color, I'll try it in black and white. I don't think that's the right way, dare I suggest, to proceed. I think you come across it and you think, yep, from the day one, from the start, this will be a black and white image, or this will be a color. So put your color hat on or your black and white hat. Yeah. Do you agree? That's quite a good way.
I do very strongly agree with that, actually. And I often advocate to people that they use the black and white or the color settings in their cameras, because if you shoot RAW and JPEG, obviously you can make a really nice black and white conversion of your RAW file. But by switching it to black and white, you actually get to see the image. And I think it helps you with the composition, because obviously it takes a while. You know, you've developed over a time an understanding of how the yellows would look and how the reds would look and the blues, but it takes a while to learn that. So if you switch to black and white mode, you've got an idea of how things will be. So you know that actually that's a bit of a mush. So if I just move to the right, that separates them and I get nice, clear, distinct lines, things like that.
Very well put. Absolutely agree. Yeah, very, very well put. And so you get your little black and white JPEG, don't you, on the back?
Yeah. And I feel the same about aspect ratio. I suspect that you do as well. I mean, this is a square image. Was it always going to be a square image?
It was, from my point of view, because I needed that diagonal to do what it did. And I wanted really another diagonal on which shows quite well. In fact, there's two. It separates and delivers two triangles of rock, which are quite fierce. But so I did see it from square, and I was brought up on square actually. From my husband. So, well, I'm glad you like that. Well, the next one is nearby. It's not. It was a few weeks before lockdown actually, and it was one of the. Beautiful. Oh, good. Oh, that's kind of nice reaction. I'm glad you responded so quickly. So, do you agree about that 1 second thing? It is fascinating, isn't it? You do a quick global look, and then your eye and your brain completely process and evaluate, and then and you just very sweetly, thank you for that. I'll settle up with you later. So that's very beautiful. But it was a very strange phenomena, because the lighting delivered these trees as you and I see them now, as blue. Now, I've never seen that. And there are two things that were strange. One is the sun was almost down, but it lit a few trees at the front, so they're warm. And then the trees in shadow, and we know shadow goes blue, and they went very blue. And then the other thing that was odd is that the foreground here is sharp. There was no wind. And then the background is sharp, but in the middle there was movement and there was a wind, and I couldn't understand where it was coming from. But it turned out to be a sort of a tunnel, if you like, where a breeze came right the way through the middle of the image and softened the reeds, so they appeared to be coming out of a sort of yellow sea. Whereas in the foreground, there was no wind, no breeze.
Yeah.
So it must have lasted probably a second or two. And it was, as a
Yeah.
result, it was a really fascinating, because you can see right into the background, Angela, the very back here, you see it sharp.
Yeah.
And the trees are sharp in the background. And it was a lovely phenomenon. I found it magical and romantic and just.
I thought it was mist initially.
Yes.
It's the movement of the reeds. Yes.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I love the colours and the really nice linear arrangement of the trees.
Yes, I'm very fond of it. It was not far from me. I'm doing a project on a place area called Cranbourne Chase, which is known as an area of outstanding natural beauty. You all know those. There are quite a few of them in the country. Well, the next one is, thank you for your nice comments, is another black and white. I remember bales coming into this country in around the 60s, mid 60s. And that they replaced the rectangular bales that as kids we used to haul up as we could onto the trailers of tractors. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how I could get these bales to do what they should do. And I was really pleased with the lighting on them. And then the sides of the lighting here, they were set against quite dark green fields. And it was quite contrasty. And here there was a nice little bit of light coming up, and each of the bales showing up there, and a fairly dark sky. Once again, it had rained a bit. So I think geometric shapes appeal to me. I'm a really untidy person, I have to tell you. It's a pretty awful thing to have to admit. I'm not quite the person who opens a drawer in a chest of drawers and then fails to close it again. But I'm not far off that person. So I tend to be somebody who puts something down and then says, out of sight, out of mind, I better leave it there. So there are lots of bits of paper everywhere. But with my landscape photography, in order almost to kind of compensate for my untidy nature, I have to have absolute precision. Isn't that funny? So and here
I love the way that the bales, the foreground bales, fit just under that first dark band.
Close thing, yeah, very, very close thing. Well, and thank you very much. And going back to precision, the lavender, I had to ask somebody, a hotel receptionist in a place called Dean, very nice guy. I said, could you give me a quick phone call or an email or something? It was quite a few years ago now. We had emails, yes. When the lavender is right, because once again, I never get it quite right. So next June/July, could you let me know? And we chatted a few times, and he said, yep. And as we came through to the end of May, he said, no, still nothing. And then all of a sudden he said, it's really good now. And because I had the opportunity and I'd earmarked a bit of time, the next day I flew. I flew down to the south of France, and I went to this spot that I already knew. And there was my tree. It was still there. And it's quite complimentary because a few other people have visited the same tree, which is really great that they found one and done a different interpretation. You know, it's not my place. It's lovely when an image is, you and I were talking about postcards. It's about generosity and not really about, being territorial. The only thing is, I was rather cross with the farmer because for the life of me, I could not get this diagonal, whilst that one was going out of the corner there. I could not get this one going out of the corner there, because it just wouldn't have worked, and not for lack of trying. But I still think it works quite well, and the lavender was just absolutely glorious, and I was very grateful to him, my hotel receptionist guy.
And that tree really, I mean, like you said, the lines pull you in, but that tree just holds you there, doesn't it?
You could say it's a bit mannered, but I don't care. You couldn't not have done it. I mean, I was trapped. I couldn't turn away and just say, no, that's corny, or it meant a lot to me.
That's beautiful. I bet the aroma was incredible.
It really was. Yes, it really was. It was lovely. Well, back to England, and our last one is black and white. 3 doggies of mine. that was a fairly diabolical experience, having high cirrus cloud doing that, mimicking the tree. The trees. It's a place called Wyn Green in on the border of Dorset and Wiltshire, and on it needed the dogs to sort of animate things, I think, generally
Yeah.
speaking, and I rather like that. So that was really quite effective. But that it was not a particularly nice day, but the sky was absolutely extraordinary, and I've never really seen it look like that ever again. But the clump of trees have been there for a long, long time. Many, many years. And I've lived in North Dorset for 35 years and I've never seen anything like this before. So motto, yes, take your camera with you. And if you're a photographer, landscape photographer, I know it's very easy to say, well, I've always got one with me, my phone. Supposing somebody sees the image you've done on your phone and they say, I wonder what you'll say to this, Angela, but I have had it happen to me. And they say, oh my word, that's marvelous. Now, look, I've got a pizza restaurant. I've got a wall. It's about 5 foot. What I'd love is a 5 foot by 3 sort of image of that. And honestly, I've got £5,000 in the budget. I'd absolutely love you to do one. And a nice, good definition, good resolution. Can you help me with that image? And you look at him and you said, I did it on my phone.
Yes, you would be a bit stuck.
You would be a bit stuck. So I think it's worth taking either a high resolution, what we used to call compact cameras. We don't now anymore, do we? That will deliver some, fairly heavyweight image. Now, I know people will say, come on, Charlie, get with the program. The latest phones are incredibly high resolution. They can be pumped up. It's not, you don't really need any more, the big state-of-the-art cameras. And I'm not suggesting that for a moment, but just something with a little higher resolution. Do you kind of agree, or am I being a bit?
I think that there are some great cameras on phones these days, but I don't think you don't get the full control, and you don't get the the bite, particularly if you're going to blow it up.
No. I don't think so, and the depth of field is extraordinary because of the lens is so tiny.
Yeah.
Well, now, if I may, we've just got a few more, but I'd love to.
Oh, your insects.
I'd love to share my insect. Now, I know that macro photographers may well comment, and I'm more than happy to be completely shot down in frames and told that they're a load of rubbish. But what I want to say is that I so enjoyed doing them. And the first is either a dragon or a damselfly. And when one looks at the world that we share with other creatures and beings, they almost have the same right. Well, they do, the right to be here as we do. And I think the more we admire and wonder and relish nature, which we're a bit disconnected from, or rather, how can I put it, hugely dislocated from, many of us who do photography reconnect every time we do a photograph of a landscape or a dragonfly or whatever, a damselfly. We definitely reconnect, and I feel very strongly about something that's happened to many of us in this lockdown who are fortunate enough to be able to get out. Many people have had an appalling time on the 50th floor of apartment blocks, and my heart breaks for those people who must have been almost suffocating, and I really feel wretched about that. But but at the same time, I'm so grateful, hugely grateful to have been able to step into the garden and walk along a riverbank and be able to see these lovely creatures. So I feel very strongly that for those of us who have been fortunate enough, it's been an incredible experience for me to suddenly see this other world of creatures. And there's another one here of a damselfly who landed on my finger. And I found that, this may seem a bit diabolical and slightly loony, but I thought, what a privilege. And I know St. Francis of Assisi, I've got this image of St. Francis of Assisi, who for some reason, all living things gravitated to him. I mean, can you imagine if a robin, who's pretty okay with humans for some reason, but and it's rather lovely that they seem to have less fear than other birds. But if a bird suddenly arrived on your shoulder and said hello, I mean, it would just be too marvelous. My father used to have a tame jackdaw, and was used to sit on his shoulder. So this was a great privilege. And then squirrels. I'm rather pleased with this. I mean, there were other photographs of squirrels, Angela, that will be a ton better than this. But I was really pleased with the lighting. The quality isn't great, regrettably, but I'd never really photographed my squirrels before, of which there are about 8, I think. And I'm sure other people would say, well, yes, you know, but they got rid of all the red squirrels. But I didn't really think about that. I just wanted to think about this lovely creature and its habits and the way it ate its nuts.
I don't think they actually planned the demise of the red squirrels either. I think it's just a consequence.
Yes.
It wasn't a deliberate act on their part.
I know, but they get, you're quite right, it wasn't. No, thank you for that. They get such bad press, the grey squirrel. And then I thought, it's another one I was really, really pleased with. And quite understandably, everybody, the people who've seen it, of which there have been 3, oh, what's that? And I thought, well, let's take away the name. A bit like a flower. Let's not call it a rose. Let's just call it an extraordinarily beautiful and amazing thing that we're able to wonder at and relish. So I don't know the name of this beetle or moth, and I'm not going to be any better off when somebody says, oh, well, it's a Liptus macarsus or whatever it is in Latin, you know. And I wouldn't mind knowing a little bit about its habits, but if you look at it on my hand, I've got a rather hairy hand, it's just an extraordinary thing, isn't it?
It's very similar colours to the image of the trees.
Yes.
With the moving reeds, isn't it?
Yes, it's a very good point.
Colours.
And look at the fur down here.
Yeah.
And these antlers, it's only, I have to tell you, it's probably not more than about ½ an inch, maybe.
Right.
I think somebody did see it and say, oh no, there's a terrible creatures. That somebody saw it and said, oh no, there's a terrible. People used to eat them in medieval times. And they're awful. They ruin the crops or whatever it was. Anyway, I think that's the penultimate one. No, there's one more of another one of a squirrel, similar to the previous one, which is there. But this is
but again, nice
early in the morning, very early in the morning. You can see the peanuts. So it was a setup, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I probably will never be particularly good at it, but because I spend so much more time doing landscape photography. But do you know what? The pursuit, Angela, the having a go element is really the most enjoyable thing. I'm not a very good cook, and most of the things I cook are inedible. But I love trying, and I think that's what we all love, trying to find that friend of mine was a composer. I remember him saying, trying to seek that melody is so joyful. Sorry about the background helicopter noise. And the final one are some swans who are here daily. And they were majestic. And the lighting was like that. It was quite early in the morning. The water was blue, obviously reflecting lots of blue sky. And yes, it's not a, you know, a wow photograph, but I think having a go at something in the lockdown period that I haven't been able to do much before has given me great pleasure. And I know one thing I should be saying, perhaps while we're looking at the swans, is I've been judging a competition for the Art Society, it used to be called NADFAS. And it was a huge compliment to be asked to judge this competition, which consisted of artworks from young people between 19 and 23. And there were 21 or 22 images, and I looked at them all on screen, and I felt not qualified really to judge, because they were no landscapes, but they were very, very ingenious, and they were designed to express what the lockdown period meant to each of those artists. And I found it completely fascinating. And finally, I gave scores to them, and then there were other judges as well. And so that was a really interesting process. And it reminds us of how talented, you know, young artists are. And this competition gave them a wonderful opportunity to express themselves in their art that was perhaps latent in them, but they hadn't had an opportunity to do something like this. So it was very well received. In fact, there have been a number of competitions, and my own Landscape Photographer of the Year, which I might blab about for a few seconds, has come to an end. And the images presented were absolutely fantastic, and the judging process is now in train, it's happening. a very torturous process it is, but very thorough. And all images of the United Kingdom. So very, very exciting to see them. And this is the 13th year, Angela, that it's been going on.
It's been going that long. Every year I see lots of people being very excited because they've had their email to say that they've, they've had an image or images shortlisted. And this year, I think getting that email really gave a lot of people a boost.
Oh, that's what's made me want to start it with the AA all those years ago, and then Visit Britain supported this. And I'm so glad you said that, because there's so much talent in our country, and we know that photography is what I call my little pet phrase. I've got enough of these boring little phrases, but this one I quite like. Photography is the people's new common language, and it's important to join the conversation. And,
yeah.
And it really is. We love photography, and it's a terrifically good way of for people who hitherto maybe haven't had an opportunity to express themselves artistically, and they pick up the camera and they say, yes, oh my word, yes, this is it. I can't paint, I can't write poetry, I can't compose music, I can't cook, I can't garden. Oh, but wow, the camera. So it's just a fabulous creative device that people are discovering every single day, and it's giving them a lovely opportunity to express themselves through photography, to express their response to their world around them using the camera. And oh my word, the talent. I look at a lot of the images in Landscape Photographer of the Year and say, oh, I wished I could have done that. So wonderful quality.
And it's always so tough, isn't it, to select even a shortlist, let alone trying to whittle that down to an overall winner when you've got such talent, because you're comparing fantastic images with other fantastic images and trying to pick between them.
You really are. And it's incredibly difficult. And all I could say is that for those people who don't necessarily come to the top, and the winner, for which there's £10,000 prize, that does not mean that their images are third rate or mediocre. It absolutely doesn't. They're just terrifically high standard, and you're quite right. It is agonizing. It is agonizing and takes a long time.
And what is the timeline? Sorry, what is the timeline now for the competition? Because you said the shortlist has been announced, or the people who are shortlisted know that they've been shortlisted, and there's judging going on. When will that be completed?
That's going to be finishing pretty much, let me just get this right, toward the end of June.
Right.
Then the images that have been selected are going to go and be put into order, and then they're going to have their captions allocated to them, and then they go off to the publisher. And the book is published in, I think it's going to be, I may be wrong, but I think it's November. And then there's the exhibition, which, thanks to lovely Network Rail and everybody there who've been so supportive, who believe in landscape photography and want to make their stations destination stations and put some art in there. We then got 12 stations that the exhibition will tour to. Big stations, they own 18 of the biggest, and they're starting off with Waterloo, which is great. And we hope it'll be down in what's called the concourse, where Eurotunnel used to be. And there'll be hopefully a big opening night, and we'll have somebody to come and open it. We've had in the past lots of lovely people, Alan Titchmarsh and Ray Mears, lots of people who are associated outside.
Oh, I hope it can go ahead the opening night. But
yeah, do you want to come along?
I'd love to. I've always admired. I see the images. I've seen them at Reading Station. I've seen them at Paddington Station, and I always get a later train because I have a good look. And
how lovely! Oh well,
they're always great to see. And it's always nice to get a photograph of them. You always recognize somebody's name. You think, oh, I'm friends with that person. I'll get a photograph so they can see what it looks like in the environment if they haven't been able to get to that station.
Yes. Oh, that's a super thing. Yes. Well, I'm so glad you're so supportive of it. Thank you. That means a great deal to me. That's saying on air that you think Landscape Photographer of the Year rocks, as they say. What I'd love to say, really, one thing, if I may, and I'd love to know your comment, is that yes, you mentioned very sweetly that it's lovely when somebody says they'd like to buy a photograph. And I think photographers ought to buy one another's photographs, And I've bought quite a few over the years, and I've bought some wildlife photography because I just admire it so much. And there's a marvelous lady called Jean Manson, and I've never met her, but I saw a photograph of two hares playing. They weren't boxing; they were playing,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just a masterpiece. If anybody looks up Jean Manson, Manson. I don't know her. I just saw this image in the Royal Photographic Society, I think, and I just thought I had to have it. So I got in touch and I bought it. So it is important if we want other people to buy our photographs. It's important to buy one another's, I think. So
That's a very good point.
I do like to collect wildlife photography if I can. So it's all part of the mix, isn't it?
Yes. So you do. I assume you have some Charlie Waite images on your walls, and then you have a few wildlife images from other photographers.
Do you know, it's a very, very good question. I don't have any of my own photographs on the walls.
Oh, really?
No, I don't. Yes, I do. I've got one in here. Yes, I do. I have one of lavender. But one of my dog. Yes, one of my dogs.
You've got to have a picture of your dog.
Yeah, I have one of Tank, my dog, my Staffordshire Bull Terrier from Battersea. I've got a bit of arthritis, but I love looking at photographs that I couldn't possibly do myself, because I couldn't be. Wildlife photography is about so many different things, and I'm sure many of your viewers are wildlife photographers. It's about, boy, is it about being alert and prediction, and knowing what the creature is going to do and what its habits are. And I see wildlife photography that is just, in British wildlife, that is just marvelous. And we all know the British Wildlife Photography Year competition at the Natural History. A lot of it's about, rather sometimes a bit grim, where you see, a creature attacking another creature, but sometimes they're very humorous, and so really, really marvelous. So maybe I should put more of my own up on the wall, but I rather like to have other people's.
Have you heard of the Close-Up Photographer of the Year competition?
I have.
That's a bit newer, but yes, you might enjoy that with your insect images.
Yes, and maybe I think mine would be thrown out in the first round. but I have. Yes, I do know about it. And my nephew runs Comedy Wildlife Photographer of the Year. So
that is a fun one.
Yeah, he's been doing that some time. But I'm glad about Landscape Photographer of the Year because it's been going so long, and we had entrants from over 70 countries, I think. And I really, it's a way, in conclusion, of just saying, hey everybody, this wonderful country we're in, and let's send some of the best photographers, amateur in the main, it must be said. And just before let's remember, amateur means for the love of, and just because you're professional doesn't mean to say you're going to be a better photographer. There's some wonderful photographers who don't do it for a living.
Yeah.
Who have a marvelous sense of vision and understanding of landscape, and means a great deal to them. So thank you to all of them, to everybody who's entered, I have to say.
So Charlie, just before you go, of the images that you showed us, of your landscape images, if you were to print one to put on your wall, which do you think it would be? Have you got a favourite amongst them?
That's a real tricky one. And yet at the same time, I think it's the one that probably conjures up the most emotion at the time. And it may well change, possibly tomorrow. But the tree above Petra meant a lot to me.
So the very first one?
The very first one, yes. And there is a desire sometimes when one's preparing a book or whatever it is to do a print as soon as possible, because I will add something about printing that I'm sure you will endorse, that we absolutely must print. We have to print, because otherwise our images are going to be residing like manacled and imprisoned in an external hard drive. And that's just an awful thing. So however we print, ideally ourselves, which took me a while, it did take me a week or two with somebody who very kindly just held my hand all the way through the printing process, We talk about calibration and profiles and everything. A man from Photospeed, and absolutely incredibly helpful. And that really, I call it, the print is the photograph's rightful inheritance. And it truly is. We have our image, and we've nurtured it. We've used our camera. We produce the photograph, and then what? Is it just going to live on a monitor for the rest of its life? But the moment it's printed, it's tangible and people can enjoy it, and you can touch it and smell it, and it's really important. So the reason I love that one, you kindly asked me that question, really good question, is because it comes with it huge admiration and sense of wonder at Petra, which is near where it was done, where 20,000 people lived and no one would have known they were there. Nabateans, they were called. And I thought the little tree was something of a hero, and it struggled on, and there it is. And so I've allocated it as a bit of a favorite at the moment. And the exhibition at Bosom, there are about 50 images up, and I'm really pleased with the way it's going. It's tough. We've done some webinars, and it's tough to start an exhibition almost opening night on the day lockdown begins. But I followed Michael Kenner, a very distinguished photographer, and so I think it'll be up for a good long while. I hope until the end of August into September, when the gallery will open again, I hope. Oh, so can people they can't actually go in at the moment? They can't go in at the moment, but if they go on to boshamgallery.com, that's may I spell it? BOSHAM, Bravo, Oscar, Sierra, Hotel, Alpha, Mike. I've remembered my phonetic alphabet. I've been learning it. What was X? Oh yeah, X-ray. And there's every single image in the gallery is there to be seen online. And every so often we have a Zoom thing where I talk about a few of them, rather like we have now. And so it's available to see all the images, and they're quite a few black and whites as well as color. Oh, fabulous! Well, I'll make sure we post a link. Oh my word! Could you? That would be absolutely lovely. That would really be. Luke Whitaker is the curator. And it's a lovely gallery in a place called Bosom, as I mentioned, and it's just south of Chichester on the water near the Solent. Sounds lovely. Okay, well, Charlie, thank you so much. It's been really lovely talking with you. And with you, and thank you for asking me. It's been terrific. Lots to say, isn't there? You can tell with me. Well, it's always a lot to say. Though. It's all interesting. Well, you're very kind. Why use one word, Charlie, when you could use 12? The other day. Oh, it's been a real pleasure. I'm passionate, and I know you are, about photography, and I know that all your listeners and viewers are passionate. So I could end by saying long live photography, but most especially long live landscape photography. And thank you to everybody for coming on. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Angela. Farewell. Bye-bye.